Hi, I'm George with Music Production Alliance. Welcome back. This is the last video of the full mixing R&B series in Pro Tools. I'm so glad that this is the last video. As you know, I've done 28 videos for this mix series, so I'm hoping that the material that I've given you has proven to be helpful for you. I certainly have learned a lot. But I have a special guest for this next video. His name is Jonny Lipsham. Jonny Lipsham is a jazz musician who plays piano, plays drums, is a great mixing engineer, and is also a great mastering engineer. In this video, I invited Jonny to do the mastering of the song Alone With You by Justin Myles. The tracks are available for download at the Cambridge website. So feel free to go and grab them and then just follow along with the videos. In a minute, you're gonna see Jonny Lipsham mastering the song in Studio One. His mastering workflow is very simple, very elegant, and very easy to follow. In the video, Jonny is gonna share how he applied EQ, how he approached some of the problem areas. For example, one of the issues that I had on the mixdown was that the snare was too loud and the top end was a bit harsh. Well, Jonny looked at that and applied some simple EQ and tried to fix some of those things. However, the snare did end up being too loud, and this is a result of the stop and go workflow that I have with all of these videos. Sometimes it's better just to do the complete mix series non-stop and then just break up the videos to share with you guys. However, for the sake of instruction, these videos have served their purpose. This was not about showing you how to mix, but rather how I approach mixing, and for you to just take a look and say, wow, I can use that, or maybe that wasn't so good for me. So the goal is to learn from each other, right? So please watch this video. It's about 30 minutes long, but it's very detailed. Jonny is very detailed and he takes his time explaining things. I like the way that he approaches things, very methodical, very thorough. The way he speaks is very nice, very eloquent, so it's easy for you to understand. So watch the video and do me a big favor. Once you're done watching the video, can you give it a thumbs up? And also, I'm gonna put Jonny's link below to his YouTube channel. Please go ahead and check out his videos. He has some amazing videos, and his approach to presenting some of the material is very different. It's very elegant. I keep saying that, but he's just so, he has a way in which he explains things in a very consistent manner and very simple. So please thank Jonny for me, give him some good comments, and go and visit his channel. Again, the link will be below. Also, the link to the stems will also be below. And support the artists as always. Thank you so much for watching this mix series, and I'll link up the entire playlist below so that you can go back and start on video number 1. That is if you have time. So anyways, it's been great. It's been good. And don't forget that tomorrow we have a date at 8 p.m. with the live stream mixing a song by Jesse Rutstein and producer Ben Delanis. They will be online, so can't wait to see you there. Let's watch the video now.
Hi there, Jonny here from Jonny Lipsham Studios.co.uk, and in today's video I'm going to be mastering, as you can see by the page. This is not the normal song page that you folks see when I'm doing my videos. I don't do a mastering video very often, but I'm doing one today. This has been sent to me by my good friend George Pinto, who's a great guy, and he's been doing a series where he's been mixing a song, and he sent me this and asked me if I would master it and video the results of the mastering, and take you through the process that I go through for mastering. So that's what we're going to do. So here we are in the project page in Studio One. The song is called Alone With You. I'm not sure who the artist is, which is why I put the letters JM, because that was kind of in the file name that George sent me, so I don't know who that is. So, but that's what the song is called, and if I knew who the artist was, I would enthusiastically credit them with it, but I don't know. So let's go through the process of what I've done here. I've got the limiter open here and I've got it pinned, and we will come to this last of all and why I have it set up the way I have. So we will start by turning everything off. Doink. I'll leave the limiter on for now because it's providing us with a little bit of extra level on the way out. And we're going to play the track from the beginning. And then I will go through the EQ and the compression settings that I did. And some of the other processing that I did that you don't see because I ended up taking it off, and I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so here we go.
There's nothing left for us to...
Alright, so played a little bit of the beginning of the verse there and the intro. Now you might have just noticed there that whilst the track was playing, I switched this from K20 to K14. I use K14 for mastering and K20 for mixing. If you have absolutely no idea what I mean by K20 and K14, I will explain. There's a guy called Bob Katz, who is a mastering engineer, who developed this system of metering that really helps with getting good, consistent mastering and mixing and mastering levels on your mix bus in particular. And what his system does is it moves where the 0 point is on your meter. So basically clipping would be up here on K14, and K20 it's up there. And can you see that the 0 line has changed? K12, the 0 line moves up again. K20, it's there. Versus the standard, which is the peak and RMS level. So that is where clipping is there. 0 dB. And what basically happens on the K20, if I just do K20 and then I hover my mouse, it doesn't do it. Okay, I was kind of hoping that when I hover my mouse it would show up where 0 dB is on the scale, but it doesn't. But that's okay. But basically what it does is it's different types and different amounts of headroom for processing. So for K20, that's mostly used for mastering, for mixing, K14 for mastering, and then K12 would be for broadcast level. So if you're doing something for radio broadcast that needs to be of a particular amplitude, then K12 is what you would use for that. Now the cool thing is, you might have noticed, if I just go back to the peak RMS and just jump into about here in the song, this is the standard metering that you get.
With you, oh, wrapped up in love.
So the white line there represents the RMS, which is the average volume of the song, and the top of the meter is the peak level, which is basically the loudest level that it detects. The K system doesn't do that. So what you get is you get different colors. You get green up to 0, then yellow, and then up, I think, around about 6. Then it goes to, I think maybe between 3 and 6, it goes red. And you'll see that a little bit later in the song. When I jump to the loudest part of it, you'll see that it goes red. So what I tend to do when I am mixing is I tend to keep the mix kind of hovering around this yellow area. So green for the most part, and occasionally just bumping up into the yellow. And that keeps my mix nice and conservative. When George sent me this mix, the level was nice and conservative, had a nice dynamic range to it, and a good amount of headroom, which meant I had loads of room for processing. So, which is very, very beneficial for me. So I basically turned it up a wee bit using this. I call these gain handles. I don't know what the official term for these is, but that's what I call them. And I just click and drag, and it turns the gain up of the original 2-track file, and that's of course before processing. So I turned it up a wee bit, and then I started processing it. So at the moment we're listening to it without the processing, and I'm going to get into the processing just now, so I can show you what I've done and how I've gone about it. So now I've explained this. This is really useful. Particularly the visual aspect of it is really, really useful when it changes color, because I don't want my master to be going too much into the red, because then you lose a lot of that dynamic range. And then you end up with a mix, a master that can end up being too squashed. When you add compression and limiting to it, you can end up with something that is just too squashed, and there's not enough contrast between loud and soft. And then you can end up with distortion, because the loud is so very, very loud, and the quiet is still loud. That's what the loudness wars was all about. I'm not into that at all. I like to preserve the dynamic range of music as much as possible, because really, music should be dynamic. It should have contrast between loud and soft. Composers down through the centuries have done that, from, madrigals of the 14th and 15th centuries all the way through to, the late Romantic period and into 20th century classical music. There's still a good contrast between loud and soft, which keeps the ear interested, keeps the listener engaged in the music. If you're just going to slam with loud all the time, it gets ever so tiring to listen to, and the listener can be very, very easily turned off by the music. As a mixing engineer, as a mastering engineer, I don't want that. I certainly don't want that for my artists that I work with. So that is why I work the way I do. Okay. Now that I've got all of that rant and explanation out of the way, let's get into the processing. So let's start off by opening the EQ. So the first thing I started off with, if I just turn this on so we can see all the numbers, I started with a high pass filter at about 32.4 to be exact. I didn't specifically go for that exact number. I just knew that I wanted to roll off round about 30. And as usual, when I'm high pass filtering, I basically take it, turn it up until it starts to thin out too much, and then I dial it back until, to my ears, it sounds satisfying. I've got the right balance between not overly rumbly, but still enough weight down at the bottom that the music's going to sound good. So then the next thing I did was I pulled out here at about 632, pulled a couple of dB out there. I actually felt I could pull more out, but I didn't want to make this region of the mix too thin either. But there was just some muddy build-up in this area that I wanted to tame, so I pulled that out. And then the next little bump down here is 1.5K more or less. Tiny little bit here. It's like just less than 1 dB of a cut to get rid of a little bit of harshness, and then another little cut at 4 of barely 1 dB to deal with some of the crash cymbals and a little bit of the sibilance, and then a very tiny little shelf of barely 0.5 dB at 12K. And that little sound you might have just heard was my phone. We'll ignore that. So this is the bulk of my EQ moves that I did. So what we'll do is we'll listen now with just that EQ engaged. As you can see, there is a second one, which I'll explain in just a minute. So let's back it up to about here.
Is it like to dance in the rain under pale moonlight? I'm still...
Okay, so we'll turn it off and on, and hopefully it is. I mean, this is mastering, so it's going to be subtle. It's not going to be night and day different. But hopefully you'll be able to hear that it cleans up the mix a fair bit. So let's start with it off, and then I'll kick it on.
Lit stars from the skies that fall from your eyes. I'm getting wrapped up in love
On.
with you, oh, wrapped up in love.
And off. So hopefully you can hear there that we've kind of balanced things up a little bit on this EQ. I did at one point have a little bit of a bump increase here at 105. It was a bit more than this. I pulled it back to barely 0.5 dB just to give a little bit of extra weight to that bass, because certainly as a bass player I know that when you're slapping your bass, just by the very nature of the string is hitting the frets, which produces much more upper and upper mid partials of the notes rather than the low aspect when you're playing with your fingers. So I wanted to give a little bit of weight to the slapping, and I know that, you know, part of that was the way the bass was EQ'd. I wanted to give a little bit of extra weight to that. So that explains that. Okay, so let's move on to the second EQ and also why I have a second EQ. The reason why I have a second EQ, let's turn her on, is because at 7K there was just a build-up of harshness and sibilance. And I think some of that was where particularly the ride cymbal and the crash cymbals and the S's in the vocal were kind of all coming together, and it's just building up a little bit. So I pulled out 2 dB practically at this area. And the reason why I have a second EQ is because I already had this EQ here and had already done processing in this area that I did not want to change. So I just pulled in a second one. Why not, eh? Okay, so now we will get on to let's actually, before I get on to compression, let's just play this with that second EQ engaged.
Lit stars from the skies that fall from your eyes. I'm getting wrapped up in love with you, oh, wrapped up in love.
let's just play that again. I felt I needed to pull out a little bit more there.
Lit stars from the skies that fall from your eyes. I'm getting wrapped up in love with you, oh, wrapped up in love.
Okay, so yeah, so that's what that was all about. Okay, on to compression. Compression. Let's turn it on. So, the way I have this set up is for a 30 millisecond attack, 100 millisecond release, and essentially these numbers are derived from the attack and release of an SSL console, the mix bus compressor. And I really like what this does to my mix on my mix bus in mixing, so I thought I would give it a try on a master to see if it has the same kind of desired effect. And I think it does. So we have a threshold of -11, 2:1 ratio, not touching the knee, leaving that at 6 dB. But here's the thing here. I've used the internal sidechain filter, and I've used the low cut. And I'm basically telling the compressor to compress anything above 87. Because I was finding that the kick drum and the bass were kind of giving me too much compression. It was tightening up the low end quite nicely, but it was basically making the compressor work much harder because low frequencies have much more energy, and so I didn't want a whole lot of compression going on here. I just wanted to bring the thing together. So I used this low cut to basically tell the compressor, don't touch the low end, deal with everything above 87. So the kick drum and the bass guitar come through nice and punchy without any compression on it whatsoever, but the rest of the music gets very, very, very gently compressed. Only a tiny bit. It basically only pops over this this little blue threshold ball, dot, whatever you want to call it, just occasionally, and I get maybe a dB of compression at the most, which is what I want. Because when you're mastering, you are talking about subtleties. You are talking about bringing the mix together in a cohesive way. Whereas when you're compressing just a kick drum in a mix or a snare drum, then you're going to compress much harder, perhaps, depending upon your mix. But you would certainly do more than half a dB of compression. And I'm not really aiming in a master to do any more really than 1 at a push, 1.5 on a compressor. Because I'm not about squashing it. I'm about just taming those peaks, just balancing the dynamic range, basically, of the song. So that's what we went for on the compressor. So let's listen to it with everything in, and then we'll turn it all off.
Lit stars from the skies that fall from your eyes. I'm getting wrapped up in love with you, oh, wrapped up in love.
Okay, let's turn it off. And back off again. Alright, so you got a flavor of the difference between the processed and non-processed mix there. So let's go over to the limiter and we'll look at what we've got here. So I have the ceiling and the threshold set to -1, and there is a good reason why I have it set at that level. Some people have it set to just above the point of 0 dB. So they maybe have it set at -0.1 or -0.2 or even -0.5. Somewhere around that area, a lot of people have the threshold set. So basically the limiter is going to limit or compress very hard, slap down anything that pops over 0 dB or 0.1. Most people have it. However, there is a small problem with that, is that you can get something called inter-sample peaking, which basically means that audio between samples can go through and not get touched by the limiter, because the limiter only deals with individual samples that it hears. It doesn't deal with the in-between data. So you can still get peaks coming through that go past 0 dB, and they will never show up on your limiter, but you will hear them. You will hear them as distortion in your end product, and you'll not be happy. You'll be frustrated when those things happen. So my advice, when you're mastering, set your limiter to -1 so that you are well away from that point. And to be honest, you know, for as much as you want your master to be competitive in terms of volume and level with other, you know, professionally mastered songs, you don't want that inter-sample peaking to happen. So if you have your threshold set to -1, then that's not going to happen, because those inter-samples will just never get that high. So that's why I set it to -1. There is a lot of debate about this, a lot of contention about whether this is a good idea, but for me, it works well. I have the release set to 100 milliseconds, so that when the limiter actually does do its limiting, it then releases nice and sort of moderately, so that you don't get any pumping, which is certainly not what I want. I mean, I'm really only looking at the very, very most, a couple of dB of limiting going on. And then I basically drive the input, excuse me, I drive the input up until I'm seeing my limiter getting at least close to that -1 area, and I'm starting to see 1, occasionally 2 dB of limiting going on. Then I know that we've got it more or less in the ballpark. And then I just basically tweak back and forth. I'm looking at this meter here, which is peak RMS, and I'm looking at this one, which is my K14. I mean, you can change it on the limiter as well, which is really, really cool. So you can have it K system, or you can have it peak RMS. I like to have both going on. Some people don't agree with that, but I like to have both going on. So there you go. Let's actually turn the limiter off, and you'll see that it actually dropped significantly in volume. Here we go, that's off. Okay, so you could hear that it is significantly louder with the limiter in, and I think we peaked there at -2.87, which is okay. Anything up to a maximum of 3 for me is okay. If I'm getting close to that, I might just back this off a little bit. Maybe back it down to about 4.3. Let's try that. Yeah, that's much better. So not hitting the limiter nearly so hard. Not hitting it very hard anyway, but not hitting it particularly hard. So there you have it. Now, some of the issues that I have had with this particular mix master is that snare drum is loud, and you can see that it's hitting the limiter, and I can tell you it surely is occasionally also hitting the compressor. So I've had to play about with the threshold on the compressor until I have that snare drum not really hitting too hard into the compressor, because when it hits into the compressor that hard, the compressor basically turns everything down. It's not just turning the snare drum down, it's turning everything down, which can make the whole thing just kind of pump unnaturally. So it's a case of finding a particular happy medium with that, because that snare drum is so loud. The bass guitar is also a little bit on the loud side for the balance of this mix, and I would dearly love that vocal to come forward a little bit more, especially in the verses. That would have made for a slightly easier job on mastering, and some of the sibilance was also an issue, and build up of the crash cymbals on the in terms of EQ was a little bit tricky, which is why I ended up with this second EQ here. I talked about that earlier, and I've pulled out about 2.5 dB there, which is really as far as I wanted to go, because I didn't want to lose the top end of the song and make it just sound too dark. So that was the trade-off there. A little bit off the cymbals, a little bit off the sibilance, or a slightly darker master. So that was the trade-off there. Now, what I did try before using the EQ was I tried a little bit of multiband compression. Studio One has a fantastic multiband compressor. Let's go and get it and bring her in. And what I did was I basically bypassed everything. I think I bypassed everything. Apart from the high frequencies here, so that basically I could zero this in to that point of about 7-ish. And then I could set the compressor settings so that it was only compressing that particular spot. But it was just not really working for me, so I abandoned that idea and brought in the second EQ, and I think that the second EQ does the job. So there you have it. I hope that has proved useful and instructional for you, George, and your subscribers. And it's been a lot of fun listening to this song and working with it. It's a really nice song. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks very much for asking me to do it, and I hope to see you on another video another time soon. Take care.